Hello, everyone. We are back with another episode of Love, Laughs, and Lessons, and we are in our Matchmaker series. So, of course, we have another fantastic guest here today. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Frankie Bashan, CEO of Little Gay Book and Little Black Book Matchmaking, and this is our podcast. And co-host Denise Ray will take it over, and she will introduce our guest.
Hello, hello. Today on our podcast, we're excited to introduce Wade Kyle. Wade is the visionary and CEO of the Matchmaker. So Wade grew up in a small town near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where Wade was faced with challenges of embracing his gay identity in a less accepting environment. At 18, he moved to the vibrant city of Pittsburgh from the small town, where he connected with an eclectic community of drag queens, punks, poets, performance artists, and mystics. Wade began his matchmaking journey while attending Point Park University as an LGBTQ friendly art school, graduated in 2013. Is that right? Yes, 2013. His fascination with his ancestry linked to the Salem witch trials, which we'll hear all about, led him to devote the next 3 years to studying divination, astrology, and the occult, aiming to explore the depths of the human psyche. In 2016, Wade returned back to matchmaking, moving to New York City, and in 2017, expanded his expertise and his reach, combining his knowledge of matchmaking with esoteric studies. Wade focuses on creating profound connections within the LGBTQIA community. His matchmaking approach is deeply influenced by principles of the gay liberation movement, disability advocacy, intersectionality, and human rights, embodying his commitment to fostering queer joy and helping individuals find their ideal partners. Wade, welcome to Love, Laughs, and Lessons. Happy to have you.
Welcome,
Thank
welcome.
you so much. Thank you.
Wow, what an impressive, I love it. Love that bio.
Yeah, it's been a journey, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, that means that you've got lots of experience and can better understand your clients, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely, especially the gay experience coming from a small town. There's a lot of stories out there amongst the queer community of having a hard time growing up and then moving to the city and having this like liberating experience. So it's definitely something that I experienced as well.
Okay. And what led you into matchmaking? Like, how do you get from this small town outside of Pittsburgh, right? And
Mhm.
so, and I get that wanting to be in the big city and wanting more, but how did that now turn into matchmaking for you?
Yeah, so I was in college for public relations and I was looking for an internship, and that was the era of Patty Stanger's Millionaire Matchmaker, and there was a couple other TV shows on Bravo. And I remember I was sitting on the couch. My couch, literally, we found it in the dumpster because I had no money. And I was sitting on my dumpster couch and I was watching TV, and this woman who was a matchmaker in New York City, she said something on the phone to someone, and she said, I think you would really benefit from this service. And that's when I realized I'm like, oh, matchmaking is actually a business. Like, this is something that I can do, right? So I went to Google and I Googled matchmaker in Pittsburgh. And then I found a dating service located in Pittsburgh. I sent her an email and I was like, hey, I'm looking for an internship. And she was like, come on in, like, let's talk. And I literally was designing brochures for her. Like, this was like when we were transitioning over to like more digital marketing, but I was making brochures, printing them. And then she was like, hey, do you want to be the client liaison? And so it was literally my first job in college outside of working at Starbucks. So yeah, I was an intern, then I worked my way up.
And
So
what's a client
cool.
liaison?
Yeah, so I think it was just a fancy word for recruiter.
Yeah.
I since it was a dating service, their business was set up for client to client matches, so everyone paid to be in there. So I was literally hustling dates all day. So I was on the phone constantly setting up dates with people, and then in the evening I would go out to these networking events to recruit more single people for the business.
Oh my God.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hard
I was
work.
Yeah.
freshly 21. I knew nothing about love. I knew nothing about life. I had just started drinking. Yeah. legally for the first time, and here I was like matching people 60 plus. I had some elderly clients too.
Wow. Yeah. So that was how many years ago?
So that was in 2011.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So 20, what company? Tell us, do share. I'm
Yeah,
nosy. I
so
need to know.
it was called the Modern Matchmaker. It's
Oh,
definitely
yeah.
like a Pittsburgh local
Mm-hmm.
matchmaking service. Yeah, and it was more of a dating service. I haven't kept in touch with them since leaving. I left in 2013 because I was graduating college and, I was like kind of getting tired of the matchmaking stuff at that point. And I was like, well, maybe I should explore other options. But I always felt like I was a matchmaker after that experience. And I was like, I'll never be able to work like an office job anymore, I don't think. It kind of like ruined me for my career.
Or just got you seeing, got it, like helped you see that you could actually do something differently.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Because there's so much, I mean, you get to be so creative, I think, in this industry. And if you're a people person and a connector, it's such a beautiful way to do what you're naturally inclined to do anyway and help them find love.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, you have to wear many different hats. Like there's the creative aspect and then there's the marketing and the technology aspect. And, as we look into modern day dating, like even back in 2011, the way people were relating is so different to how we relate now. And there definitely is that technology aspect to dating, whereas back then Tinder was like just really becoming a thing in the zeitgeist and online dating. And, they had Match.com and like gay.com and stuff like that. But in the course of like 10, 15 years, it has really changed so much.
Mhm.
So when you were at Martin Matchmaker, did they cater to the queer community or was it just heterosexual?
They did not. Yeah, I strictly
Okay.
was working with heterosexual people. Honestly, in New York, opening my company is the first time I've worked with the gay community. But
Okay.
I have, experiences from my own lived experience for relationships. But I definitely see a lot of differences there's a lot of differences and similarities with gay dating. I would say that there's like nuances between the two, straight and gay dating.
I'm
And-
always asked which
yeah.
is easier because I've worked in both sections. What do you find easier?
So, the term easy is so subjective.
Mm,
What I say is that the milestones are different, right? Like the milestones for straight relationships are set by society, they're set by the system that we live in, which is like you get married, then you have a kid, and then you buy a house, or like whatever order that comes in. I think a lot of queer people and gay people in general grew up thinking that those didn't apply to them. So,
mm.
we may have an easier time relating to each other, but we don't have these set societal milestones. So, in terms of getting into monogamous relationships, it's a little bit different and it's definitely looked at a little differently opposed to the straight side of things.
So
Okay.
how does that impact matchmaking for you?
Yeah, so one thing that I've noticed is that gay men come to me at the age of like 45 or 50 and and this isn't so unlike the straight side either, but they're like, I'm ready to settle down finally. Like I'm ready for that relationship. Whereas like people in their early 30s are kind of like still getting out there and involved in the hookup culture. And also people in their early 30s they don't know what they want as much because they've had delayed experiences in the gay world. I always
Mhm.
say when gay people, especially if they come from like an oppressed background, when we turn 18, it's like turning 13 all over again because we now have the opportunity to experience things that we may not had the opportunity to experience in our adolescence. Like I know growing up in a small town myself, I never had the first, high school kiss because there weren't a lot of gay people where I was from. I was the only really out gay person. So when we turn 18, then we have to start figuring life out again. So
Right.
it makes relationships a little complicated because you reach 30 and you're like, oh wow, I still don't know what I want. Sometimes I talk to gay men and they're 60 and they're like, oh, I'm finally ready to settle down. People call it Peter Pan syndrome, but I understand why it happens.
Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. For sure.
Does that
Yeah.
make it tougher when they're like 60 and then they're ready to settle down?
What I find is that the 60 plus people know what they want a lot more than younger people. But whenever I'm working with the 60 plus crowd, it's a little different because they are survivors of the AIDS epidemic. So,
Mhm.
I talk to people and they're like, I'm an AIDS widow. And me as a millennial, I'm like, I can't even imagine what that must have been like. So they have a whole different set of trauma from that. And then they also grew up in a world that wasn't as accepting of coming out. So, I talked to some older gentlemen and they're like, I'm freshly out of the closet at like 50, whereas like Gen Z now, they're coming out at like 11. So it's a
Right.
very different world. And we kind of have to, I have to adjust my matchmaking style based on their lived experience, right? Like older gay men might have more of a stress on health just because of what they lived through, right? And that's something that I hear all the time. Like, I just want them to be healthy. I want them to be fit. And I understand that because they, saw their friends pass away and they kind of put a value on health. Whereas like younger people are just like, are they rich? Like, do they party? It's very different. I have to adjust my styles and like who I'm looking for depending on, what generation of gay they came from.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Lots
That's
of things
interesting.
to consider. Yeah.
Absolutely. And do you provide coaching with the matchmaking services as well?
Yeah, so I definitely talk them through. I have a separate coaching package that I use because I'm so focused on recruiting that I send them to a gay dating coach. So the majority of
Okay.
my company, every ancillary benefit that they buy is run by someone in the queer community. So it's super important to me to keep everything as a queer experience. I send them to a dating coach, and obviously I talk to them after each date and after, if they're having a hard time. I just want to make sure that they get that individual coaching
Support.
time while I'm out finding people for them.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get really busy going out that I'm like, I just want to make sure that they get the face time to successfully get into a relationship.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're still doing a lot of the recruiting, like from back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what does that look like for you? Like, and how many clients do you take on at a time? Right? Because it sounds like your service is really unique and very specialized to that person, like right, holistic in that sense.
hmm Yeah,
Mhm.
because I work primarily and I'm still a relatively new business owner, so this will change over time as my team expands, but right now it's just me. I usually take on like 1 to 3 clients at a time because I would just want to make sure that I'm getting my success rate up and that I'm being really successful in matching them. And I like to go out and handpick the people. Maybe one day that'll change. I'm just like constantly talking to people and the recruiting aspects, every night I'm going out to an event. Like I'm going out to an event after this and it's at a donut shop where the donuts look like, appendages. It's called Sugarwood. And
Oh,
Love it.
leave it up to New York City to come up, right? Like there's always
right.
Sugarwood.
it's gonna happen in New York.
So yeah, it's a group of gay business owners, and I go there and I chat with them, and then I'm like pitching a client soon, and if I have someone in mind for them, then it like helps me with the pitch a little bit better, and I'm like, hey, I just met this person, I think they're really good for you. Yeah, I really like to be hands-on. I'm really much in New York City. New York City is like the place that I love. I love the gay community here, the history of it. So I'm out and about in the community pretty much every day.
Yeah.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great.
I mean, that's how you build the business. That's what I did back
Yep.
16 years ago, or whatever, 15
Mhm.
and a half years ago. It was just like pounding the pavement, meeting people that are immersed in the community and like helping people. Even the name matchmaker, they didn't even know what that was, that word.
Yeah.
Do
Mhm.
you find that people are like, wait, what? You're a matchmaker? Is that
Yeah,
still happening?
I think yeah, totally. And I think that gay men, they just had never considered it. And, I say, oh, I'm a matchmaker, and they're like, oh, like Fiddler on the Roof. Like, I'm sure you get that all the time.
Oh my
And I'm like,
God.
that's such a gay reference to make, but okay, yes, it is like that, I guess.
And like,
Um,
oh my gosh, it's a decade and a half, and people are still saying the same thing. And then a few years later, they were like, "Oh, like Hitch."
right. I get that
Right.
too. And honestly, I've never seen the movie Hitch. I'm like, well, maybe I
Oh, it's
should watch it.
hysterical.
I'm
Yeah,
like,
you
maybe I
should.
should watch it
It's
so
so
that I
funny.
have some like cultural reference to what people are saying to me.
So funny. Yeah, I think there are a lot of people out there that don't even that are just it's not on their radar. So it's sort of like
Mhm.
every time you're having to explain
Mhm.
what it is, and then also show that it's valuable, that it's something that we should be considering, especially because swiping on the apps is like rough.
It's really bad, yeah. And honestly, I think as an astrologer, so I also use astrology when I'm gauging compatibility amongst my clients. And as an astrologer, we kind of like saw this happening. We saw kind of like these systemic changes that we're seeing happen right now. And dating apps, I think, are on their downfall. Maybe they'll pull it together, but I think people are waking up and being like, the dating apps aren't working. I'm wasting my time and energy, and I'm kind of putting
Mhm.
myself in danger by being on these things. I mean, we've all heard horror stories of Grindr and people, getting hurt from Grindr, and just like the effect that it's had on the culture, it's really made things transactional, and it's really like made people look at dating as like consuming a product. And it's like, no, these are people, these are
Mhm.
relationships that you have to foster. This isn't a dating app. You can't just swipe right if you've had 3 dates on someone and ghost them. Like that's just not having integrity. And so
Right.
kind of coaching, and this is especially true with younger people, that there's an alternative to dating apps, and it's called being in person. And they're really struggling with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they've
For
grown
sure.
up, right, with technology in their hands so early on that they never really, I don't know that the youngest generation has really developed a skill set for being, social, face to
Social.
face.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Face to right. In real life, social, right? We grew up playing Skelzy and Double Dutch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were told to get out of the house. Like you left and you wanted to get out. You never came back in until the
Mhm.
street lights came on. And this generation, they don't, if they're out of the house, their heads are in the phones. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I
Totally.
think it's changing though, and I really have
I
hope.
hope
And
so.
I'm part of the millennial generation, so like we're kind of like half in that world, half out of it. And even millennials are like, because we're at the age where we're, getting married and like doing all of that. Um,
Mhm.
and a lot of people aren't finding suitable partners for themselves because they're only using dating apps, which are gamified to make a
Yes.
profit and keep you in the app, that they're like, I need an alternative. And people are really starting to get out there. I've noticed in New York City, just meeting people that are like, I'm single and like I haven't been going out, but like I'm really trying. And I think that we're going to see that shift happen a little bit more, especially when we look at the latest like Bumble advertising fumble, for lack of a better term. Like, what are you saying? These are your consumers, and you're telling them don't be sell. Like, it's so weird. I
It's
just think
yes,
I think that matchmaking is kind of going to have a renaissance from all of this because
I
people
think
are
so.
realizing this isn't for
absolutely.
me. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
wait, what Bumble reference? I missed that. What kind of,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. Okay.
advertising?
So
What they say?
they put up billboards, and I'm not exactly sure where the billboards were. I think probably Los Angeles, maybe some in this region, San Francisco, that was basically saying celibacy is not the answer. Like, get out there and meet people, which is such a weird thing to say to consumers. And I think, and I don't know where it's coming from. I think it's coming from an online conversation in the zeitgeist about women, straight women being celibate because men can't step up and date them properly. I think it's being inspired by something called the 4B movement in Korea, where women are withholding intimacy with
Sex.
men, and it's like a
Mhm.
radical feminism movement. And I think it was just meant to shock people and get that publicity, but I don't think that it's working in their favor.
It landed wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was very tone deaf and
Like,
result. Yeah.
it sounds to me what I take away from that is like, here, why don't you have casual sex? Here's our dating app. Is that,
Yeah, I mean, you can interpret it that way for sure. But then again, if you look at the data, Gen Z and millennials aren't having sex at the rate that the boomer generation and Gen X did. So like it's not like something got missed in
Yeah,
that. I'm
yeah.
sure it
Didn't
passed many,
translate. Yeah.
yeah, it passed many rounds of approval, and someone was like, "This is a great idea." But I mean, some people believe all publicity is good publicity, but
there's that. Yeah.
yeah.
Then there's that. Tell us a little bit more about how astrology comes into play with your matchmaking. And I think we had a few conversations about whether or not we use astrology, and we were just talking the other day about, how profound astrology can be, and it can't just be I'm a Cancer, my name is Larry. No, that's not it, right?
Mhm.
And
So
don't match me with anybody
with
who's Sag. It's like, really, is that
yeah.
enough? Like, do you really want that to be a non-negotiable?
Right. Yeah. When we look at astrology, we're looking at ancient systems, right? And like people look at astrology like it's a religion, and it's like, no, it's a system of patterns. Like we're not sitting here worshiping Saturn, it's just simply a system that we can use like a personality test or like, whatever compatibility tests that are out there. So when you look at a birth chart, there's so many planetary placements and alignments that can happen, but through pop culture and through pop astrology, they focus on the sun sign, right? Which
Mhm,
represents kind of our ego. And that's all that people write about in the magazines. And it's like a very like reduced down version of astrology. So
yes.
people have gone out, say they're a Libra and they dated an Aquarian that didn't go well. So they're like, all Aquarians are bad. And like, in matchmaking, we don't talk in absolutes, like we
Right.
shouldn't. There's so much more to a birth chart than just the sun sign. We're looking at Venus placements, which is like how you want to be loved and show love. And we're looking at Mars, which is kind of like the fire behind you, the inspiration, what gets you moving. And then together we can kind of build a picture of like what your intentions are with love and like how you should be loved. And we can look at Mercury for communication and where it falls in a birth chart. Like there's so much more than you're an
Mhm,
Aquarius that I almost get hesitant showing some people their birth chart because I don't want them to have like confirmation bias. So it's definitely a conversation that I have to proceed with caution. And I always say, this is just one birth chart, like meet everyone as an individual. Like this is just a roadmap to kind of help us make decisions. But at the
mhm.
end of the day, they're not definitive. It's not an absolute.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's not black
Yeah.
and white, and people want to make it black and white. So
Mhm.
emphasizing the fact that it gives you some information, not all information, and not to make assumptions.
Right. And every energy expresses differently, and there's so many different ways that you can look at a birth chart. Like you can progress a birth chart forward and see where they're at now. You can look at a birth chart from a geographical location. Like there's so many ways to look at astrology, and it's this very helpful system, but it has to have a huge caveat with it.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the biggest takeaway that it is a complete system, and we can't just pick and choose the things we want out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I'll spend my whole life studying astrology and probably not even like scratch the surface of everything that's out there.
Mhm.
Wow.
So true.
So are
So
clients wanting you to incorporate your knowledge in this area to help match them?
So I've been getting some people love it, right? Like if you're bought into astrology, you love it. It's something that you consume culturally. Some people, when I say that I'm an astrologer, I kind of get like oh, like I don't believe in that. And it's just because of the simplification of it in culture that people don't think that it's helpful. So for people that are kind of resistant to it, I will never read their birth chart to them because I just don't think that it will be helpful. But
yeah.
behind the scenes, I'm looking at it if they give me the proper information because it helps me make better decisions. So we can do things like take one person's birth chart and combine it with another person's birth chart and kind of create one birth chart that is how we gauge compatibility. We can also compare one to the other and start pulling certain aspects like the Mercury sign is in this house and then in this house, so your communication will be this. Like so there's many different ways that I can gauge compatibility, but if someone's not into it, I'm just not going to tell them. And then if they go on a date and it's like really good, I'll be like, hey, I used astrology to get that date for you. So how did that work out?
How did that work out? That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know I
Tell
definitely
us more. Yeah.
get potential. I get clients that I'm working with occasionally, or even catches, folks that I introduce to my clients that say, "Hey, are you, what's her birthday? What's her birth
hmm
year? What sign is she?" And yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's kind of like what you want to avoid, right? Because then they're gonna look at the birth chart and then get all these preconceived notions about them based on their birth chart. Like you have to use that information responsibly because you can learn a lot about people based on it, but you can also like confirm biases from it.
right, right.
Uh, so I never show clients other people's birth charts. It just feels very personal.
Mm,
That leads me to my next question, which is photos, because I feel similarly about pictures. Because we're
yes.
matchmakers, we're interviewing, we're vetting, we're spending time with people, we're developing relationships with them. And I feel like photos tend to be it's just like a barrier because people do the same thing. They have preconceived ideas, they project onto the pictures, they make assumptions. And yeah, so do you show photos as a matchmaker?
So this is something that I've been considering testing, using the astrology to, kind of gauge the compatibility. Obviously, physical attraction is super important for gay men, so I am showing photos just because it's a way for them to feel comfortable, right? Like I find that a lot of gay men get anxiety if they don't see a photo and they're such a visual creature, men, so I always make sure that it's the best photos that we can get, right? Like they work with the photographer and I'm like, they need to be really good, just show their energy. I do think that you can get a taste of energy through photos, but it's not the full experience. So I try to tell people, like this is a 2D image. You want to see the 3D, you want to feel the energy in the room, you want to hear their voice. Like that's how attraction forms. This is just like the basic, it matches what you're looking for, and here's a photo. People
Mhm.
always look so much better in person, and
Of course.
people get really caught up on the photos. So if I had a client and they were getting caught up on the photos, I might be like, we're not going to use photos with you and you have to trust me. Um, I'm still testing that out. I'll have to get back to you on that because I worry about not showing gay men photos. I feel like they would be like, I'm not doing this, just from anxiety.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think as it's
Mhm.
so there, it does so much. Appearance matters greatly in the community.
Yeah,
I
like
do agree.
most likely they'll have a physical relationship before an emotional, spiritual, or mental relationship. And, they're consenting adults, so they can do whatever they want. But I try to tell them, like, give it some time before that happens. But sometimes the chemistry is there and it just happens.
Mhm.
That's how the community is, though. And that's how we were brought up, in the
Yeah.
nightclubs and through Grinder, and again with that transactional mindset of looking at photos. So it's difficult. I see why it's important, but then part of me is like, we should just like go into everything blind and like just trust the universe to like
Mhm.
guide us in the right direction.
And then also our
Yeah.
clients trusting us that we're not going to send them on a date with somebody that that we didn't meet and vet and really feel at our core would be potentially a match, both, physically and beyond compatibility and so on. So, but it's
Mhm.
hard. I think I've worked with gay men throughout the years, and definitely it's more when I think about the lesbians and the bi women and so on, they're so much more open to,
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
just trusting and going with the process versus gay men. So
Yeah.
it's tough. I mean, I think you're in a tough position in that way.
It is hard, and it's kind of met with this mentality of like, well, if you don't show me photos, I can go on the dating apps and see whatever I want. But it's also kind of like feeding into an unhealthy thing, right? Which is that being so visual, while I understand it's important, is limiting, right? Like you're looking for a relationship that is spiritually fulfilling and emotionally fulfilling, and you base it off of external looks. It almost feels contradictory, right? Like
Right.
I'm matching you for the deep, intimate connection.
Mhm.
I'm not matching you for the superficial. You can get that anywhere. You can go out to Hell's
Yes.
Kitchen and get that tonight, Like that's
That's right.
the thing about being a gay man is like it's not that it's like sex isn't available to everyone at any point. What I'm trying to go beyond that, right? I'm trying to go to the like, I want you in a relationship. I want you in an apartment with someone living together and like
Mhm.
sharing intimacy. So I kind of have to break that mindset a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
for
agree
sure,
with
for
that.
sure.
That's definitely, it's a challenge. What are you seeing in New York around like ethical non-monogamy, polyamory, people wanting matchmaking services in that area? Are you finding that?
Oh yeah, everywhere. So it's really interesting. So each neighborhood is a little bit different, right? So I live in Bushwick, which is in Brooklyn, which is kind of like a very queer, gender nonconforming type neighborhood. And Hell's Kitchen, it's very predominantly gay men. So the cultures are very different. But in both of those cultures, there is ethical non-monogamy. I find it a lot in Hell's Kitchen. I talk to people and they're like, I would want to be matched with someone that would have an open relationship. And I haven't taken any of those people on because I'm still trying to figure it out in my mind, like how that would work. I definitely am like branding myself as a monogamy matchmaker, but I think it's so prevalent in the community. And I think it comes down to the fact that gay men lose intimacy very quickly. So they meet someone, they have this like fiery, passionate love and it's physical, and then it just kind of gets boring to them. And I think it comes down to men being men. So I understand it, but when we're matching for the long term and the short term, it's like hard to like gauge that in there. Um,
Hmm.
so it's definitely something that I'm seeing a lot. I understand it as a gay man myself, like telling a man that they can only have one sexual partner for the rest of their lives. Like I just don't think that that's realistic even for me. So again, the milestones are different for gay men. I feel like it's a lot more of an open conversation. But I want to match for like 1 to 2 years of monogamy before they have that conversation, right? Like I'm definitely matching for that what the polyamory community would call like a nesting partner. And then if they decide to open it up, they can have the conversation later. I'm not matching directly for that.
I wonder if
Yeah.
it's important to like in the interview process, just like asking, are you, at all, are you completely opposed to a non-traditional
Hmm.
style relationship? So knowing that, okay, this is somebody maybe down the line that would be open, but not
Yeah,
all that. Yeah.
the majority of people that I work with, they do want that monogamy. But even sometimes I think to myself, like, okay, so they're gonna get it. But I imagine that some of those people that wanted monogamy will end up opening their relationships because there's no standards in the gay community for that kind of thing. Like that's the beauty of it, right?
Hmm.
Like when we were
Hmm.
talking about the difference between straight relationships and gay relationships is that opening it up and having other sexual partners isn't like a big deal. It's something that I see all the time and
Right.
it's kind of like, okay, it's part of it. And I think straight people are starting to do that too. And I've been seeing that conversation
Sure.
like being had amongst the straight side of things. So I think it's when we look at nature, there's not that many monogamous animals. So maybe there's something to be said about monogamy being really difficult for humans.
Yeah. I mean, like
Hmm.
it's a social construct that we made up, I
Yeah.
think. And
Mhm.
in a way, the gay community, gay men have been doing this for years, and there are
For
all these
years.
examples of how they do it really well.
Yeah,
And
exactly. And it's like, and I think that, and what I've been seeing a lot, and I don't know if you two have seen this, going out and talking to straight people and them saying, "Oh, I wish I was gay." Like I laugh at myself because the amount of times that I'm like, "I wish I wasn't gay" growing up.
totally,
Now straight people are coming and being like, "I wish I was gay. Things would be so much easier for me." I'm like, "Oh my God, like
I
things are
know.
shifting." Like I'm glad. I'm glad that we're kind of setting the tone for the dating world, but wow.
Mhm. Mhm.
Could you even have imagined? Not in my lifetime that I ever imagined
No.
get here.
I mean, I was like 22 when gay marriage became legal. So when we talk about open relationships, it's because we grew up not thinking that we'll ever get married. It's because we grew up not thinking we'll ever start a family. Like those
Mhm.
things were out of my mind. So it's like if I want to have three sexual partners, then I can because this wasn't given to me. This
That's
and
right.
and and in the world today, it's always like being hung over our head of we'll get rid of gay marriage. And it's like okay, we have like three relationships already. Like, okay.
Yeah. That's not that, yeah, don't try to scare us with that threat.
That's right.
Yeah, it's wild. It's wild.
I think, you know, in the hetero world, in a way, it's like trendy and cool to be gay now, to be queer. And people see that we're like, live this, there was so much just pride and joy. And, you know, being, I know when I first came out, I felt these huge arms wrapped around me. I'm like, this is amazing. This community took me in when my family was like, oh, hell no. I come from a Middle Eastern family and Jewish family, and they were just like, there's no way. And
Right.
you just so welcoming and so accepting, and love to celebrate. So I can see why, right? Straight folks are like, I want to be a part of that.
And I also think it comes down to community too, right? Like whenever I left my small town, basically leaving a farm, and I went directly into the drag world, right? And they were so accepting and I felt so safe amongst drag queens. And now, but like back then in like 2009, drag was still edgy. It was still this like crazy art form that was like underground and like kind of gritty. And now look at drag. It's like so mainstream. They're like rock stars. And I think like some straight people look at that and think, oh my God, look at their community. Like we don't have that. Like my
No,
community is like
yeah,
my wife and we live in this house and we don't have third spaces to go to. So I think that they look at us and think, oh my God, I wish I had a space that I could like, have culture and like
yeah.
do
A
things.
tribe, like what we call a
Totally.
tribe, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
totally thrive.
exactly. And so like, and I love that we're like welcoming and like, yeah, why don't you come and enjoy drag with us? Like, why don't you come in and like go to a drag brunch and like consume some of our culture because we love it and you can love it too.
Totally. It's making me think of Patricia Field. Did you ever get with, I'm sure her store was probably closed by the time you got to New York City, but she was at the beginning of all of that styling. Do you
Hmm.
know who Patricia Field is?
Yeah, I remember reading some of her story. Yeah.
Sex in the City. She's the stylist for Sex in the City, but drag, the whole, that
Mhm.
scene early on in the 80s, I think probably before then, she was in the Village, had this tiny shop. You had to walk down steps, and it felt like
Yeah.
going into a cave, and it had like the high in men's sizes, the highest stilettos, the sexiest, oh my gosh, it just makes me think of, yeah, of her. But yeah, I mean, what a welcoming community and so much culture. I felt like, okay, my family is now kind of rejecting me, but here I found a new family and I didn't feel so alone.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and when I look at matchmaking, I also think, matchmaking is more than just relationships too, right? Like we match chosen family as well. We're
This is
matching
true.
as emergency contact. Like that was one thing that was really hard for me moving to New York, where I was like, who do I put down as my emergency contact? And then like I joined the circus because that's what I did. I was like, I don't have a community. I'm gonna join this group of freaks. So let me go to the circus. And someone at the circus was like, I'll be your emergency contact. Like if you ever have an issue, like I'll be that for you. And I was like, oh my God, this is what community is about. Like, and when I look at matchmaking, sometimes I throw events and I'm like, this is just a community event. I'm throwing a queer square dance in July. I'm like, this is just a community event to come around, dress up in, cowboy gear and square dance and do something different. It's not even a singles event because people are lonely and I want people to have community and foster community. And a lot of queer relationships start off as friendships anyways.
Totally. Yeah. You're so interesting, Wade. I love it. You bring
I
all
love
of
it too.
these different, yeah, dynamic, just awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've had a long life already in my short years of life, but I'm just an artist, so I'm always striving to like live life to the fullest, and that's definitely what inspires me to get out of bed in the morning.
Mhm, mhm.
well,
Before we go, I don't want you to end this. I want you to tell us about the name of your company and how that came to be and pull it like all together for everyone.
Yeah, so I was just thinking of what I stand for, the kind of books that I read, and just something that also was like kind of catchy and cute. I went to I was gonna call it the mystical matchmaker, but that was already taken. So I went to a thesaurus and I like started looking up, synonyms of the word mystical, and magical came up, and I was like, oh my God, the magical matchmaker. I'm like, that is me. I bought the trademark right away. I'm like, this is going to be my branding. I think someone wrote a book. There's like a, it was like a hard decision because someone had been writing like teen fiction to the Magical Matchmaker. But you know, I decided to ultimately go with it, and I think it fits me perfect.
I think so
I
too.
agree.
Agreed. Agreed.
I heard little like people in the community matchmaking world were mentioning, oh, wait, there's this amazing new matchmaker on the scene, and your name had come up several times, and I'm like, who is that? And like, you know, life is busy, right? So it's sometimes hard to connect. And then Denise and I got to meet you, Wade, in New York City at a matchmaking conference recently, and I was thrilled to be able to have an opportunity to talk for a little bit and get a sense of you and your magic, because I see, and you're just, I'm excited for you to be a part
Oh,
of.
Excited for you too. Yeah.
thank
Yeah.
you. I really appreciate it. You know, and on the matchmaking side, like we're all, you know, gay matchmakers, so it's a community. We're not competing with each other. I think at the end of the day, what we all want is queer joy, right? Like we want gay
That's right.
people to meet each other and fall in love, and that will make the world a better place. And so when I meet other gay matchmakers, I'm always like, let's get together and push forth the gay agenda.
Totally. Agreed. So Wade, how can folks find you?
Yeah, so my website is themagicalmatchmaker.com. All my social media is under Magical Matchmaker. They can send me a DM on Instagram. They can reach out to me via my website. I have a TikTok following that I make TikTok videos pretty frequently. They can reach out to me there. So yeah, I'm very responsive. I'm like always on my phone.
Okay. And then are you working with clients all over or
So
just
right
mainly?
now, I'm strictly New York City with plans to extend out into the Northeast. Obviously, it's going to take me some time, but I'm very much in New York right now, looking at Boston, Philadelphia, and DC, and then hopefully one day I'll go national. You know, it takes a while. I'm in my second year of business ownership, so still trying to figure everything out. But right now, I'm strictly New York.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for spending some time with us today.
But thank you. This was so
Absolutely.
much fun.
And thanks everyone for listening. We will see you next week. Take care, everyone. Kisses, hugs. See you
Bye
later.
for now.